I doubt anyone could say that they enjoy having to respond and deal with ethical dilemmas. I say this especially since if you find yourself in an ethical dilemma, you're pretty much deciding between two not so great outcomes. So how does a person find their way through an ethical dilemma without tearing themselves apart? I didn't realize it before taking this ethical communications class, but I allow myself to follow a personal philosophy for finding my way through an ethical dilemma. And even though I had no clue, I've realized that I personally follow a combination of some of the very ethical systems we have learned about in this class. The two main systems I find myself using are virtue ethics and act-utilitarianism. According to William Maher and Paul Sandin in Communicating Ethically, a person following virtue ethics would ask what would a person of the highest character do in an ethical situation. There are no hard and fast rules, but one must exercise mature judgment and reason in balancing one virtue against others in specific cases. Act-utilitarianism is the type of utilitarianism that holds that in each separate case, one determines what the greatest good for the greatest number of people would be. Now, I consider myself to be a pretty ethical person, and while it might not always be easy to arrive at what I consider to be an ethical conclusion, I am usually content with my results. Much of this has to do with the sources of my ethical development, including my family and loved ones, my semi-religious background, and even the companies I've worked for. Each role model I have had in my life has developed and helped shape my ethical beliefs, and even the bad people who presented themselves in my life have helped develop my personal philosophy on ethics. This might be why I follow virtues ethics, because my role models, such as my parents, have taught me how to be a person of good character, which results in respect from others and an overall positive ethical background. Other sources of my ethical development include the company I work for, which strives on doing the right thing and follows a strict code of ethics. And while I don't follow a specific religion, many of my loved ones do. And I feel like since they are my role models, their religious background trickles down to me since I sometimes go to them for guidance on certain issues. Of course, when I find myself in an ethical dilemma, various issues related to my responsibilities, such as my role as a supervisor at work, come into play. This is also true with issues of diversity and faith when trying to find my way out of various ethical dilemmas. For instance, some of my decisions are made based on my faith or kind of like a gut feeling, which creates an issue as to whether my decision could actually be considered ethical. Applying my personal ethical philosophy to my personal and professional life has proven to be very useful in assisting me with difficult ethical decisions. One example was when I was faced with informing my boss about how I saw one of my employees eating company product that we use to make food for our customers. This is considered grazing and is actually a terminal offense for the company. Unsure about what to do with what I saw, and knowing that he knew I saw him doing something wrong, I soon found myself in an ethical dilemma on what to do with the information I had. If I told my boss what I saw, then the employee, who had been dealing with family issues himself and was really stressed out, would probably end up fired, and if I didn't tell my boss, then my credibility would be at stake with the other employees I was in charge of, since they too knew that I saw the employee grazing. Also, if they told my boss before I did, and I didn't, I could get in trouble as well. If I followed act-utilitarianism, I would determine what decision would result in the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people in this particular scenario. I arrived at the conclusion that telling my boss about the employee grazing would result in the greatest amount of good, because if I didn't, then that could leave the rest of the department with stress or anxiety if they felt that I favored one employee over another and proved to be inconsistent in my leadership. On one hand, the part of me that follows virtues ethics felt that a person of good character would show compassion for the person with their job and livelihood at stake. However, a person of good character would also decide on ethical dilemmas with good judgment, and in this case, I felt that the right thing to do would be to stay honest in telling my boss what I had seen. In the end, the employee was fired, and I truly felt bad about it, but I knew I did the right thing by staying fair in order to keep the respect and trust of my other employees and my boss.
Created using Powtoon.